This video presents research by the Wales Centre for Public Policy on the role of communities and the use of technology in addressing loneliness during the coronavirus pandemic. It outlines key learning from the experience of 71 individuals involved in over 50 informal or small-scale formal community groups across Wales. The research explored the effect their involvement had on experiences of loneliness, the role that online and offline technology played, and how this kind of community action could be sustained, enabled and enhanced into recovery. This is part 3 of 3 videos, and it looks at key findings on enabling, sustaining and enhancing community action and connection. Digital communications being rooted in specific communities and their activities wasn't just key to digital equality access and tackling loneliness, but also to the coordination of community groups through the pandemic. This grounded digital wasn't a reflection or cause of community groups that were inward-looking or detached from wider systems or structures. Just like icebergs are distinctly local blobs of ice, but are also thickly nested in broader ocean ecosystems, almost all groups were widely and deliberately connected in a way that was key to their strength and sustainability. Even groups in isolated rural areas work through complex networks, from hyper-local street level to local clubs, businesses, charities, councils, broader statutory services, national bodies and even networks internationally. This was mainly through online interaction, but because this wasn't seen or functioning as part of this detached online world, but still very much lines of communication between people and places on the ground, it changed the way this ground was thought about and functioned. The space between places folded, but the places themselves were still firmly rooted, particularly because of lockdown. They became local but not local, providing this critical site and focus for tangible grounded action, but it was action that was a product of much wider interaction across localities, sectors and institutions. This relational local, being rooted in communities but widely networked at the same time, was a defining feature of the pandemic response of groups in this research and seen as key to their impact, and it was built on strong collaboration between state and non-state actors. This was key to enabling, sustaining and enhancing this community action, and contrary to concerns of blurring boundaries, it often made them bolder and relied on them being bold. Groups discussed conscious efforts to avoid supporting public sector cuts and austerity by holding up the state, but showed a clear role for community action in reaching those disengaged with services or unknown to them, building sustainable relationships, utilising local networks and knowledge, and providing preventative support. A lot of this was made possible by its separation from state action, but this didn't mean working in isolation from it or replacing it. It relied on working with the state, on its professional knowledge, expertise and resources. What worked well was building a shared recognition of the strengths and limitations of both state and non-state action, to establish clear roles and boundaries and clear frameworks for working across them, partnerships that gain strength from difference. So working with public services to establish when statutory support's required, what's available, who to call, and how to avoid putting people or relationships at risk. So training, protocol, referral pathways and liaison roles were all key. And working with local authorities through regular personal communication based on genuine participation and mutual respect, a willingness on both sides to ask for information, expertise and assistance and offer it in return. Where, when and whether all this happened depended on a huge range of factors, from local governance structures to the attitudes of individuals, highlighting the need for a more systemic approach to collaboration with communities. Alongside and supporting this collaboration, a range of community-based resources were also critical to groups' functioning. Firstly, community members' skill sets and networks, particularly public sector employees' specific experience and the networks they were able to activate across local authorities and public services. Softer skill sets were also key. There was largely very proactive individuals galvanising and coordinating things, mobilising people and networks already active in the community. And what worked for optimising these community assets was creating online and offline spaces for connecting local expertise and experience, supporting skills development in communities, and working from home, which meant these people resources were more place-based and provided the scope, time and motivation for community engagement. Supporting and celebrating new and existing community clubs and infrastructures was also highlighted as key. And crucially, the many third and voluntary sector organisations and CVCs underpinning, creating and maintaining many of these things to do and the places to do them. Finally, the research highlighted a fundamental need to consider the clear socioeconomic inequalities cutting across all these enablers. Other important community-based resources were local governance structures, especially town and community councils, or councillors and clerks acting independently. Where these existed, they were often fundamental to enabling, funding and coordinating community action, in the pandemic and before. But this wasn't always the case, and was enabled by confidence and guidance in avoiding the risks of association with informal groups, and the recognition, respect and support of local authorities. In parts of South Wales, where town and community councils are less common, county councillors often played a bigger role, but a key enabler here was having roles assigned to specific local areas. Access to finance and other support for informal groups was a particularly strong theme around enabling, sustaining and enhancing community action, which isn't to say funding's the be-all and end-all, but within current structures, even accessing £100 for a one-off project usually requires formalisation. So lots in this research felt that people with ideas are often put off acting on them, whether a community festival, a youth club or rejuvenating the duck pond, and it was only the strong driver of the pandemic that forced people over or around this barrier, usually in one of three ways. Some formalised, seeing it as the only option to access the finance or recognition they needed to be effective. It took a lot of time and resources and often created a sense of being dragged into something bigger than they wanted. A small minority partnered with an existing formal group, an anchor organisation, but this relied on their availability and capacity and was often complicated in itself. Then lots actively avoided formalisation because of its lack of suitability or their lack of resources to do the paperwork. They achieved a huge amount regardless, but a lot relied on donations from the community and group members' own pockets. Costs like phone lines, fuel for deliveries, leaflet printing and fronting shopping bills, which people were happy to take on in exceptional circumstances, but it's not sustainable. Crucially, where small amounts of money were made available to informal groups during the pandemic, the impact was powerful. Finance usually either came from town and community councils diverting community reserves like events funds, which was often logistically complicated, or from these new, flexible grant programmes administered by CVCs. Groups who'd access these described them as game-changing. These relatively small sums of money massively increased the scope of what they could do, gave them financial control and lots of wider support, like navigating safeguarding and GDPR. Since all community activity starts off as informal, creating structures that support informal groups is key, even if they go on to formalise later. So the experiences of community groups in this research have outlined what worked well and what might be needed for increasing the scope, impact and sustainability of this one layer of small-scale and informal community action. Underpinning all of this has been the joined-up working that's woven community and local action into wider regional and national structures. But the burning question is how to sustain these new ways of working and avoid a return to business as usual. And the key learning here may not be about what works for collaboration itself, but how, after years of researching and promoting collaboration, more progress was made in a few months because of the mobilising power of an urgent and shared purpose, which perhaps returns to the potential of shifting focus from the ends of connection, how to do collaboration itself, to the means, the driving purpose, how to reframe the issues that governments, public services and society seek to address so that these too become cross-cutting, urgent and shared. Wicked problems like loneliness hold potential here, crossing sectors, interests, geographies and requiring systemic understanding and approaches to tackle them. The pandemic response of groups involved in this research has supported a systemic view of loneliness by highlighting the vast systems, networks, structures and infrastructures beneath individual interactions, relationships and community connections. The importance of local infrastructures that provide meaningful things to do and a sense of purpose that both addresses loneliness directly and build preventative community networks, and of accessible means for those feeling disconnected to also engage with these activities and the networks created. The potential of using online spaces as a means to enable and enhance interactions and activities offline, and the fundamental role of inclusive digital and physical infrastructures in doing so, and the importance of governance structures in supporting these activities, networks and infrastructures by facilitating collaboration, utilising and celebrating community resources and providing support in return. Attention to all these systems underpinning community connections will be key in identifying tangible means for achieving these often elusive ends. This won't just be key in tackling loneliness, but much wider wellbeing challenges as we navigate the pandemic recovery.
For more information about our research, visit our website, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell to get an email when new videos are released.